Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. It's time to hear from the top Christian litigators in the nation who have come forward to tell us the truth and help us defend our faith.
Hear ye, hear ye. All rise. Faith on Trial with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Mano, is in session.
And welcome back to Faith on Trial. I'm Deacon Mike Mano, your host. I'm here in the studio with Gina Noel. Gina, interesting week already this week.
That's right. The U.S. Congress has elected their next Speaker of the House. Very happy with their selection. Good for people of faith, for sure. Mike Joensen is well known for his defense of religious liberty and the and moral values of Americans.
Of course, I was sitting on the ledge during part of this, after the
on
Phillies.
The ledge.
Yeah,
The Phillies are still in. Yes, another good thing happened this week.
They got eliminated.
Oh, they were?
Yeah, they were eliminated.
Okay. Well, that's how much I pay attention to sports.
They're out. My wife talked me down off the ledge. And
no remote controls flying across the room?
No. I just got up and opened the window and stepped out on the ledge. Of course, it's only the first floor. I didn't want to hurt myself. But anyway, no, it was disappointing, but they were there.
Like they say, always next year, Mike.
There's always next year. Yeah, like the Cubs do all the time. Yes. Yeah. No, it was a good series, and I enjoyed watching the games. I didn't enjoy how they ended. But anyway, getting back to Mike Joensen, Luann read me a story from Catholic Vote. They issued a statement after his election saying that this was a good election of a speaker for Catholics. So,
yeah, I think, he's a former Alliance Defending Freedom attorney, and before he became a congressman, and has shown to support he's not a Catholic, but he does understand the First Amendment.
Religious liberty and that, which of course is a primary.
And he's been working with Representative Jim Jordan on the Weaponization Committee to expose a lot of what the FBI has been doing to Catholics in the traditional Catholic
It was
Mass.
Nice to see him get a unanimous vote from the Republicans. I mean, this thing had gone on for, 3 weeks, something like that, after they dumped the previous speaker, which probably was a mistake at the time. But anyway, they did it, and we were in limbo.
I think it shows that the House is really dedicated to deliberation. I know that there were some personalities involved, and that's never good. But, Emmers, who was the nominee for about 4 or 5 hours, would not have been as, supportive of religious liberties. He voted for the Respect Marriage Act and other.
Which was a mistake, right?
Right, and other. So, all good things in time. And I like that the House deliberated and worked through it. I think they'll be stronger for it.
We've got a fresh new face there, and we'll see what he does.
Yep.
We'll see what happens. Hopefully it will all work out okay. I guess that's the best we can do right now, besides pray.
That's right. I think prayer plays a very big part in this.
It certainly does. All right, today.
How about today?
I was just going to say, we've got Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, I guess, who is the director of the Conscience Project and a legal analyst for EWTN, and she's going to be talking about this push for cracking down on people who are misgendering people, not using the right gender for them because they apparently are not what they look like.
Well, and I think it's a growing trend in our federal government to come after citizens who don't conform to this ideology. So it'll be interesting to hear Andrea's take on how that's affecting all of us and how we interact with our federal government.
Yeah, and she wrote a nice article on that. We've got a copy of the article, and we'll let her talk about it, too. All right, and then we also have Travis Barham, who is the senior counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom, on a case involving the University of New Mexico. Well, it hasn't officially been made a case yet. They're just in the letter writing phase. But you see this happen over and over again. A pro-life group comes in or a conservative group comes in and wants to host something on a college campus. And now, you got a $5,000 security fee you got to pay because this is likely to spark some unrest.
Exactly. And I think I think we've had other cases, so it'll be interesting for Travis to talk about the precedents.
It has.
And how they've been ruled.
And ADF has handled a number of those, and usually a letter is what it takes
to set the school straight.
Yeah, but we'll see what's going on. But it's part of this conflict that we see on college campuses today, and we're seeing a lot of that right now. That's what we have coming up today.
I'm glad they're letting the students for life at least have their speaker. Sometimes they're just excluded entirely.
Yeah, but those little campus organizations oftentimes don't have $5,000.
No, I agree. They shouldn't be discriminated
That's
against
right.
because the majority of the campus doesn't agree with the views and will be violent.
And college
to express
campuses
that.
are places you ought to be able to speak freely. Of course, speaking freely means that other people should listen freely too, because it's important that the dialogue doesn't go just in one direction.
Yeah,
it goes back and forth.
And maybe Travis might have something to say on this too. It seems that well, let's back up. We've had pretty peaceful college campuses for a while, but we do know that in the 60s they were pretty violent. There were even bombs being exploded on campus. But it seems to me that as days go by, different issues create violence on the college campuses. And what are we doing about that? And where is the line between violence and free speech, really?
Well, look at the pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas
That's
demonstrations
exactly what I've been thinking about.
We'll talk to him about that.
Yeah, hopefully Travis will have some information
Do
on
you have
that.
a prayer to open us up with?
Yes, prayer for peace today. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God of peace, bring your peace to our violent world. Peace in the hearts of all men and women, and peace among the nations of this earth. Turn to your way of love those whose hearts and minds are consumed with hatred. Strengthen us all in hope, and give us the wisdom and courage to work tirelessly for a world where true peace and love reign among the nations and in the hearts of all. Amen.
Thank you very much, Gina. We will be right back after these messages with Andrea Picciotti-Bayer. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, and right now with us is Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who is the director of the Conscience Project and a legal advisor for EWTN. And she's been here several times. And Andrea, we must have treated you right because you came back.
You always treat me well.
Okay, very good.
Thank you so much.
You wrote an interesting article the other week on this whole idea of misgendering, and that really this can be weaponized against Christians.
No, absolutely. The issue is really taking hold in both federal government and some state governments to make misgendering, which is calling somebody whose biological reality is male he, if he identifies as a trans woman, or a biological woman as a she, if she identifies as a trans male. So it's a little confusing, and it often feels like it's surreal. But we're seeing in different agencies across the Biden administration this push to demand ideological conformity in our use of language. And it's happening both at the Department of Health and Human Services and at the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission.
Is this the Biden
troubling
version of Newspeak?
It does sound like
that,
right?
Mm-hmm.
And what's hard about all of this is that imposing what they believe to be a civility code, right? It should be a person's choice, decision making. But as believers, as Catholics, we know that it isn't good to mislead a person on their reality. And that doesn't mean that in speaking the truth, we lack love. We obviously need to be engaging with people with an abundance of charity, especially those that are struggling with gender dysphoria or any kind of challenges to, their created state. But to impose upon the workplace, private, as well as federal employment, and to condition the ability of believers, of Catholics, to open their homes in foster care settings is another really, really critical and disturbing movement that's happening.
Well, first of all, let's go back to the very beginning here and put on your lawyer's hat. Is it constitutional to require people to use particular speech?
You know, I believe it's clearly not. And there's a doctrine that we understand. It's called against government-compelled speech.
Mm-hmm.
And that may sound familiar. This past summer, there was a Colorado website designer, Lori Smith, who brought her case all the way up to the Supreme Court. She wanted to create wedding websites, and she was concerned that her state's anti-discrimination code would oblige her to do so for same-sex marriages. She brought her case again all the way up to the Supreme Court, claiming that it was a violation of her free speech rights, and the Supreme Court agreed and said that although anti-discrimination laws have done a really important thing for our country, this one was going to weaponize these important, noble ends for fair treatment and force people to say things against their beliefs, and that was a violation of the First Amendment.
Yeah, 303 Creative out of Colorado.
Yep.
Yeah, that was an interesting case, and it seemed to me that part of the problem there is that the state of Colorado has an animus against conservatives. I mean, how many times they take Jack Phillips up to the Supreme Court? You know,
he's still under some lawsuit.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, we'll get him.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing to mention, you know, before we even get to the Constitution, there's a law whose 30th anniversary is going to be celebrated on Friday, and that's the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. And that's a restraint on the federal government to not impose any kind of policies that would significantly burden religious exercise. And so when we think about people who have a sincerely held religious belief on the nature of human beings as created male and female, to force them to speak contrary to that belief would violate their religious beliefs as well, and the government can't do that without a compelling reason. And just general niceties is not reaching that bar.
Yeah. Let's go through some of the things you pointed out in your article about some of the things that are happening now and some of the requirements that are coming down from the Biden administration on this issue.
So the first I mentioned before was a proposed enforcement guidance from the Equal Employment Opportunities Commission. Now, that's supposed to be a bipartisan agency that helps enforce our federal civil rights laws as they relate to employment discrimination. So this enforcement guidance is really to guide the investigators when there are complaints of discrimination, in this case sex discrimination, which has been broadened to include gender identity. And it's also a guideline for employers that are covered by Title VII, which is the federal law related to employment discrimination. This guidance says that misgendering a person, intentionally misgendering a person, is equivalent to workplace harassment. And it's a very troubling thing, especially because including in the proposed guidance is a suggestion to employers that they have an obligation to nip it in the bud to make sure that everybody is not going to misgender. And so it's almost putting the burden on employers to enforce this. And that could include taking disciplinary action against employees who refuse to play this game that gender ideologues are pushing upon us.
Just again, putting our lawyer hats on, what does that do to the legal position of the employer if he is sued by an employee for being forced to speak a certain language?
No, I think that it's a really troublesome situation because we've got some great case law talking about the religious rights of employers, the constitutional rights of employers, but this in proposed guidance from the EEOC is really invidious, and it says that religious beliefs are not a defense, and it almost treats religious beliefs on the nature of the human being as somehow bigoted beliefs.
You know,
and go ahead.
I was going to say,
concern.
I get the feeling, and I don't want to be too partisan about this, but I get the feeling that when all this stuff comes out of the Biden administration, I have to wonder if that's not an anti-religious administration. If
If they're targeted,
yeah,
sure.
if they're targeted, because when he ran, he was supposed to be this devout Catholic
And unifier.
We never hear that anymore. Nobody ever says he's a devout Catholic anymore. Wonder what religion he really is at this point because of what his departments are doing.
No, I think that's a really serious issue. I mean, he's our second Catholic president. I do think that he's genuine in claiming a Catholic identity, but his administration and his leadership has very much been against so many religious teachings of the church, particularly on life, on human sexuality, on the family, and the next really big push that's going on in the Department of Health and Human Services is to impose this preferred pronouns as a condition to be able to foster children in need. And that's, Catholic Church and Catholics have been some of our sort of long-time tradition is to respond to orphaned and children in need of foster care, right? Mm-hmm. We think about like St. Joseph, right, as our patron.
Right.
And our institutions, our Catholic institutions here in the United States have just been some of the first responding to the needs of those who don't have safe and loving homes. And so to see that the Department of Health and Human Services is proposing a rule which has even greater legal force that will have the effect of excluding from the pool of eligible foster families, families that don't agree to buy into gender identity for children.
Go ahead, Gina.
These rules and regulations coming out of the federal agencies such as HHS and the EEOC, likened to me the case that was heard in the Supreme Court a couple summers ago with the EPA. Are they overstepping legislation and legislating from a bureaucratic level? Could that case be made?
That's a really good point. And the Supreme Court this term is going to be looking at what's the authority of the administrative state and really questioning the deference that courts have been giving to the administrative state when legislation isn't really clear. We have this wonderful tripartite system of government where we've got the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. And when the executive legislates or goes beyond what Congress has passed, we've got a big problem. So I think that there's going to be some clarity this term on that issue. A number of the sitting justices have questioned what's called Chevron deference.
I was just going to ask you about that. Yeah, that seems to be getting gutted.
I think we're going to see some clarity, and it's good. It's really good because we want our elected officials, our legislators, to be able to have kind of the last word when it comes to what the law should be, and then the judicial system, the judiciary, is to interpret that and make sure that it's consistent with the Constitution and other legal protections. We can't have the executive, which is supposed to implement it, going beyond and almost legislating from their offices.
Right, and let's for the benefit of our listeners who may not know what we're talking about, since a lot of them are not lawyers. Can you explain what the Chevron doctrine is?
Yes, thank you.
So, yes, and I'm sorry. It's one of those things you get used to saying.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Sometimes that you forget that.
That's why Gina always asks the best questions here.
I know we've explained it on the show before, but even I can't remember, so thank you.
Sometimes when the law is passed, there's some ambiguity. How will it apply in a given set of circumstances? And so we look to our administrative offices, right, the Department of Health and Human Services, to come up with rules. In this case, rules related to Title VII, or rules related to would be the EEOC, or rules related to the Center for foster care placement agencies, that sort of thing, because we need kind of how it is in practice. But there are times in which those rules go way beyond the intention of the legislators, and that's where the administrative state goes awry, right? And we want the judiciary to come and step in and say, whoa, now, if Congress wants to do X, it should pass a law to that effect. And that's happened time and time again, where the law was not clear, and the courts struck down a rule because it went beyond the scope of the law. But along the way, in the Supreme Court, and not this Supreme Court, not this current majority, but several decades ago, came up with a rule that gave undue deference to these administrative agencies, saying, hey, they're the experts in this field. Let's give them deference when these cases come. They know the right way that this should be applied in practice. And the Supreme Court and lower courts have seen that really doesn't jive with the balance of powers that we have between the different entities, between the executive, the legislative, the judiciary. If the law doesn't say something, then Congress can go and amend the law.
Well, that's one of the arguments they're having now for the word sex, whether sex means gender identity too.
Deacon, you're absolutely right. And that was the Supreme Court has not been perfect in recent years. And one of its grave imperfections was a decision called Bostock and versus Clayton County. And that's where the court said that Title VII, as you remember, is a federal law related to employment discrimination, where they said that discrimination on the basis of sex includes discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity. It's a bit of a convoluted opinion. I think it was wrong, but it is currently the court's read on Title VII. That doesn't mean that it applies to all instances where there's a federal law that prohibits discrimination on the basis
Justice
of sex.
Gorsuch, I thought, was very firm in his statement in that opinion that this only applied to the labor case and not any others, right?
But hasn't stopped the Biden administration from taking the baton and running with it. And that's
I'm not laughing at you, Andrea. I'm just laughing at the realization of that statement.
Yes. No, it's really troublesome, and that's we've seen this happened with the Obama administration before, taking liberties with the law, and we should want, regardless of where you land in your political preferences, the law should be not anything more than the law as written. And whether normally a textualist judge, someone who looks at the text of the law and enforces it as written, a textualist judge will give life to that. Justice Gorsuch, I think, just made a mistake. And if you may recall, Justice Samuel Alito said this flies under a textualist flag, but it's like a pirate flag.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely a hijacked move. It's one that we have to deal with. Hopefully Congress can fix it.
Yeah.
So, Andrea, in terms of this legislation, how have our bishops, the United States bishops, or maybe even the Vatican weighed in on these issues for those who may be Catholics leading or legislating, or those of us just living under the laws and regulations of these agencies?
Gina, that's a really great question. I think when it comes to gender ideology across the board, the church has been pretty clear, right? Pope Francis has called it a form of ideological colonization, right? That this is a dangerous affront to what it means to be human. Where I live in the Diocese of Arlington, Virginia, my Bishop Michael Burbidge, wrote an incredible pastoral letter for educators, for priests, for families, parents, for neighbors, for everyone to figure out the right response to gender ideology, how to speak in truth but also in charity. So I would recommend people look at that letter. The USCCB has really been wonderful when issues come up that are an affront to religious freedom. So Cardinal Dolan, who's leading that, has just been really out in front of it, denouncing these attempts to silence believers. But I would mention to your listeners that there's still an open period for comment, for public comment, to the proposed enforcement guidance of the EEOC and these proposed rules that affect foster care at the Department of Health and Human Services. That's for everybody. That's for everybody to say, wait a second, this is crazy. And this is not respecting religious freedom. It's not consistent with free speech, and it's not vindicating our understanding of what it means to be human.
You know, a lot of people, I'm sure, think that if the Biden administration is proposing this, they're going to adopt the rule regardless of what anybody says. But I think there's something you want to look at that happens after the rule is adopted, and there's a court challenge. One of the things the court will look at in evaluating a challenge to a newly adopted law are the comments that came in, and how many of them came in, and what the tenor of those comments were. So in the event that these rules are adopted, the comments can assist in getting it overturned in court later.
Or the other direction, right? So it's important for all of us to comment if we can.
That's right.
Because if they had a lot of support, that may help the judge to make a ruling.
The other way, yeah. You know, Andrea, I get the feeling sometimes that as we are being attacked in society, what is it that are right now we're being attacked over? Well, our hospitals are being attacked because we won't perform abortions, and our higher educational institutes are being attacked, and all these other things are civic engagement, you know, through foster care placement and things like that is being attacked. So what it seems to me is that what we have set up, what we are doing, what our Christian faith has forced us to do now is where we're being attacked by people who did not do those things.
You know, Deacon, I think you're right. I think it's always very important, first, never to be, never fall into despair or become despondent. Second, to recognize there's only one victim. We know, our Lord Jesus Christ, right? And we can't fall into the trap of victimology, right? We are made for these times, and we actually have the law on our side and reason. I think that it's easy sometimes to think that you're the only one who thinks a certain way, or Christians may be the only ones who have clarity on this. Many non-believers instinctively understand the nature of the human person. It's built into our natural law, right? And they're looking for a voice. And this is, I think, our great opportunity. It's an opportunity to evangelize. It's an opportunity to stand up for our principles, for our faith. It's an opportunity to catechize, to teach other Catholics about what the Church is teaching on the nature of biological reality. And we also need to recognize that when the dust settles after this big push of gender ideologues, there are going to be a number of people in our midst who have been harmed by it. And we as a church and as individual Catholics need to be there to help them pick up the pieces.
Right.
And really an abundance of love and charity, thinking about how Christ dealt with everyone. Absolutely.
That's right.
And so that's we're made for these times. Yeah. Bring it on.
Yeah. Make my day. All right. Well, with that, I think we're pretty much out of time. We appreciate your time, and we recommend the column, the commentary that you wrote, and you wrote it. Why don't you give us the date and the location of it so people can look it up if they would like?
So it's at the National Catholic Register,
mm-hmm.
And the title is Preferred Pronouns, Misgendering, and Religious Freedom. And it ran October 19th. Okay.
Well, we would refer people there if they can find it. I think you can go online and probably find it pretty easily. It's a very well written piece, and we certainly appreciate it, and we appreciate your time. So thank you for joining us, and we'll have you back again one of these days.
All right. Thank you so much.
Certainly.
Enjoy your day.
Certainly. Andrea Picciotti-Bayer, who is the director of the Conscience Project and a legal advisor to EWTN. And we will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And with us right now is Travis Barham, who is the senior counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom. And he's got an interesting little matter going down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with the University of New Mexico and the pro-life group. So, Travis, why don't you tell us a little bit about it and how this came about and what is being done about it?
Well, most definitely. The basic principle in this situation is that free speech should be free. It should not cost students thousands of dollars to speak on campus, but the University of New Mexico has yet to get the memo on this because Students for Life, at the Students for Life chapter there on campus, wanted to invite Kristen Hawkins, the president of Students for Life of America, to speak on pro-life issues. And the university has charged them over $5,000 in security fees for an event that had no protesters. So it's just fundamentally unfair and unjust that the university would try to impose these charges.
Let me ask you
unconstitutional.
Let me ask you a question before we go too far in here. Has this event already occurred?
Yes, sir. The event occurred in the spring.
Okay,
so
and
she came and she spoke, and then afterwards they imposed these charges of over $5,000.
Okay, so there was no demonstration. There was nobody there picketing or throwing rocks or breaking windows, and there was
no violence, no disruption, no protests. There was nobody there, but there were 30 officers standing around.
Sometimes
and the university is charging these fees based on that.
Sometimes, Travis, before these events occur, when they announce the speaker, there's some kinds of uproar about hosting the event on the campus. Was there any of that in this particular case?
Well, in this case, the university looked at events held by other student groups where they had invited speakers to campus. And at some of those other events, third parties, protesters, had come around and had created a ruckus. And so based on that, the university said, we're going to charge you these fees. But the problem with this is the First Amendment specifically says that the government can't do that. The government can't charge a fee to a speaker based upon how someone else might misbehave. The law requires the government to go after the person who's misbehaving, the person who's creating the problem.
Well, that makes common sense.
So it's to protect the speaker and to ensure that the speaker's perspective can go forward. Otherwise, we have a situation that's called a heckler's veto, where misbehavior is incentivized because people who want to shut down the speaker didn't have an incentive to create a ruckus and up the charges for the speaker.
I'm trying to think of the case. Is that Brandenburg versus Ohio, where the court decided that they had to protect the speaker?
There's several cases along these lines that have come through over the years.
That's the one I think I remember from law school. Now, I've forgotten almost everything else, but give me credit for Brandenburg versus Ohio.
Credit given.
Okay.
That's one of them, but there's several others that have come more recently where the court has very specifically said you cannot impose a security fee based on the viewpoint of the content of speech. And the reaction of a listener is a content and viewpoint-based thing because they're reacting to the viewpoint of the speech. Here, the fear was that they would react to the fact that this was a pro-life speaker with some sort of misbehavior. But again, the government's responsibility is to go after the misbehaving person, not the speaker.
Right.
The government has to instead protect the speaker's
right.
What
seems funny in this particular matter is that the school apparently went out, and they said they had 30 police officers there, security people. So they went out and they hired all these people or put them on overtime or whatever it was for them to be there to, I guess, to keep the peace there, and no demonstrators showed up. So why aren't they saying, oops, we made a mistake and return the fee?
I hope that is what the university will do after it reads our letter and analyzes the legal principles that we have outlined for them.
Well, now
we'll see.
You had a case recently, I guess it was in Pittsburgh, was it? The same type of thing?
Yes, sir. We had another case in Pittsburgh where a conservative group invited a speaker to campus. In that instance, they were charged over $18,000 in security fees based upon an expected hostile reaction. And actually, in that case, the university helped incite the hostile reaction. And so we were successful there. We wrote a letter. We outlined why these security fees are unconstitutional, why they violate the First Amendment, reiterating the basic principle that free speech is supposed to be free.
Yeah.
And the university backed down. They rescinded the fees. And so we hope that the University of New Mexico will follow suit and take the wise and prudent action.
Now, it seems to me over the past couple of years where we've been doing this program, we've had a number of cases where conservatives or religious conservatives are brought onto a campus for a talk, and or were invited onto the campus for a talk, and the administration came in and nixed it because they said there's going to be too much damage being done. We're worried about violence. We're worried about all of this. This seems to me that it's getting more and more prevalent around the country, that these school administrators are really trying to shut down this speech.
That is correct. Now, to be fair, universities have had a bad habit of trying to shut down speech for a very, very long time. Years ago, they tried to do it through speech codes, and they still do try to use speech codes to restrict what students can say on campus. But more and more recently, we've seen this happen where a conservative group brings a speaker to campus. Sometimes that speaker is greeted with a hostile mob that literally tries to shout down the speaker. And
like they did with Riley Gaines.
They've done it with Riley Gaines. They've done it with Kristen Hawkins at other campuses.
Right.
And often the university police will stand down and let that disruption unfold, which is a dereliction of their duty to protect the free speech rights of all students. Other times, we see the situation that happened here where the university fears that might happen, and then they decide, well, based on that, we're going to charge a security fee to the student group that's organizing the event. And you end up with a situation where it costs thousands, or in some cases even tens of thousands of dollars to host a free speech event. And so free speech is not free. It's actually very, very expensive. Yeah. And that's all very, very unconstitutional.
You know what's interesting, as we talk to you in the wake of all these demonstrations that are going on in college campuses now in favor of Hamas and the Palestinians, and something that's very, in my mind, very anti-Semitic is going on. But this seems to have been encouraged almost in the classrooms. And I'm wondering how much of this is permeating everything else, including what you are dealing with here, which is these speech safety precautions or the security precautions.
You know, tracking down where all the different roots of this problem can be somewhat difficult. I mean, you're right to say that much of this stuff is inculcated in the classroom and attitudes are developed from the classroom. There's also the situation where many of these attitudes are inculcated in the student affairs office with the different policies that these universities promulgate to all of their students. So, you know, universities have been teaching students for years through the speech codes and through other actions that the answer to speech you don't like is to shut down the speaker.
Right.
The Constitution says the answer to speech you don't like is more speech. Counter that viewpoint, push back, give a different perspective. But universities have been teaching the wrong lesson for years and years and years, and students have sadly been learning the wrong lesson for years and years and years. And that's why you see these shout downs. That's why you see these security fees. That's why you see these the increased number of free speech incidents or free speech violations at university campuses. But you know, the thing that Christians and conservatives need to recognize is that when they take a stand and when they insist that their rights be respected, the law offers broad protections. We have helped over 400 students and student groups secure victories on these free speech matters across the country since 2006. And we have an over 90% success rate in litigation when these policies are challenged. So when these policies are challenged, they fall. When these kinds of actions are challenged, they can get corrected. but it requires people to be willing to take a stand and insist their rights be respected.
And that's one of the reasons why Alliance Defending Freedom is necessary and groups like it, because you step up and you protect these people and advocate for them.
Definitely.
And that was going to be my question. You've sent the letter to them. I've noticed in the letter that other organizations have also been billed for security fees, and I'm assuming paid them. It's definitely a source of revenue for their security department. While you make a great case in the letter, I wonder if the university, in an effort to reserve their right to charge these fees, will actually not take or will take action to prevent returning the fee.
That remains to be seen, and we hope that the University of New Mexico will follow the example of the University of Pittsburgh and just rescind the fees and move on. Well, but that ultimately is their decision, and we'll see what they do, and we'll respond accordingly.
Does your letter ask them to change their policy for other organizations, or is it simply to protect the Students for Life in this one incident?
The primary focus here is to protect Students for Life in this incident, but once that happens, one would hope that the lesson would get transferred to other situations, so the University of New Mexico would not continue to face these kinds of letters and these kinds of situations.
Yeah, the date on the letter is the 11th. I'm wondering if you've received any inkling of a response back.
We have not heard anything back from the university yet, and so they apparently are still pondering. We will continue to await their decision and then evaluate that and decide what the best next step would be.
Okay. Now, we're talking about how ADF helps people out in these things. How do people get a hold of ADF? What is your website, and that people can go to if they need help? Because this part of what you're in business for is to help these people. So how do they find you?
The most easy way to find us would be on our website, adflegal.org, adflegal.org, and that's the fastest and easiest way to get a hold of us. There's a button there if you need legal help to contact our intake department and let us know what's going on, and then we can respond quickly to that. The other thing folks can, the other great thing about working with ADF is that we are, by God's grace, able to offer our services for free. There are generous people across the country who have supported our work, defending the freedoms, the fundamental freedoms of all Americans. And as a result, if you contact us, you're never going to get a bill. So if you have a problem, if there's something that doesn't sound quite right, it feels a little fishy, reach out to us, and we'll be glad to look at it and tell you what kind of options you might have.
And speaking about not getting a bill, this all does have to be paid for at some point. And so if you want to contact them without a problem, but some spare change, you might be able to make a nice donation. And I think it's tax deductible. Make a donation to help them out. It's a good organization.
Tax deductible, and yes, we would be grateful for any assistance, because filing lawsuits and representing people defending their liberties is not a inexpensive undertaking. So if anyone's willing to help us, stand with us in this fight to make sure that everyone's constitutional rights are respected, we would be most grateful.
And ADF is a good place to park your money if you need a place to put it, because they are good people there. And if you've been a listener to this program, very often you know that it doesn't go too many weeks where we don't have somebody from ADF on to talk about these cases. So they're involved in a lot of cases, and I would recommend them to you. Gina, did you have anything else? You looked at me over. Okay.
Yeah, no.
No, I think we're pretty much out at the end of our time. Travis, I wanted to thank you for joining us today. I certainly appreciate your input on this particular case, and I think this is a very important matter because it goes right to the heart of what is happening on college campuses today with the this push to all things that are progressive left, and this no response is allowed. This cancel culture. In a democracy, we debate In Marxism, you just cancel. And I think that's what we're faced with right now.
That's exactly right. The universities are supposed to be a marketplace of ideas where all viewpoints can be heard, all viewpoints can be debated and examined. And when universities make free speech so expensive, that just can't happen. And that's antithetical to the purpose of the university, and it's also a fundamental violation of the First Amendment.
Right. And just as an aside, I've seen some of these people that are protesting these days, and the camera crews move in and they ask them questions, and they really can't answer the questions. They just repeat a few choice words over and over again, and it's like there's no thought behind it. So I guess maybe we're turning out some zombies or something. I don't know. But anyway, good luck with you with the University of New Mexico. We hope it comes out okay, and I'm sure I will hear from your PR people if that is ever resolved, and we will talk again.
Thank you very much. That sounds wonderful.
Certainly. Travis Barham, who is the senior counsel with the Alliance Defending Freedom, and we will be right back after these messages. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. And we're back. You're listening to Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio. Interesting program again. We always say that all the time.
A little bit of a civics lesson today.
A little bit, yeah.
Yes, I enjoyed Andrea's take on the things happening both in our administration and in our courts. She is so
articulate, yes.
Yes, I think it was a good summary of how the gender ideology has infiltrated almost every level of our elected and judicial positions, and I'm glad to hear that the church has actively tried to educate individuals and our leaders on these issues.
Our Bishop Joensen, has issued some time ago a pastoral letter about transgenderism in the Catholic schools. And we talked about that for about an hour. We had somebody from the Chancery, and we had a priest from the Catholic Bioethics Center in Pennsylvania talking about that. It was a very good letter that he put out. And so our bishops are doing these things. Problem is that sometimes we don't hear about them because they don't make the regular news.
Well, yes,
and it's kind of like they're being blacked out a little bit.
Well, and I know Andrea recommended that we look up her bishop's letter, Bishop Burbidge.
Mm-hmm.
But when she was describing the letter, I thought of Bishop Joensen here in the Des Moines Diocese. He also wrote a really good letter that's helpful to our educators, most especially, and our administrators in our churches and our priests when we are discussing this issue. He did a great job of describing natural law and the love of the church for God's creation.
That's right, and these are issues we can't ignore.
Right.
We can't bury our head in the sand and say, "Oh, that's politics." We don't want to get involved in that. No, these are issues that involve the church, and that we have to be aware of, and that we have to be able to respond to. And again, when we looked at Travis Barham from ADF, this is something that we've seen around the country, and we've had this on several programs over the years, where schools are trying to shut down conservative speech by claiming that somehow this is going to evoke a riotous behavior, and so we need this big security fee to pay for it. And I think that's a way to try and curb speech. I think Travis was correct.
Yeah, it makes me wonder when, because really topical are these pro-Hamas rallies on the college campuses. It makes me wonder if they actually are being charged for the security fees, because the footage I've seen on the news makes it look very violent, very, very aggressive.
And you notice the fee is always being charged to the organization that is not violent, because of somebody else that may get violent. And no, I think Travis is right. The law requires you to protect the speaker. And so the lesson in higher education should be, we don't care, we will protect your right to speak.
Yeah, and I imagine, I've heard that, and I don't know it to be true, but usually the protests or the protesters, the aggravators are not from that university. They
Yeah,
actually are imported from some organization that is paid to disrupt those particular speakers.
Yeah. Well, we're almost out of time now, so let's end with our Defender's Prayer.
Good idea.
Okay. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle, be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Well, that's it for this week. Remember, you can find any of our podcasts of these programs or any of our other local programmings by going to iowacatholicradio.com. You can listen to them going back months if you would like to, if you have the time to do that, and we don't bore you. But anyway, you can find all of our podcasts there. Until next time, have a blessed and peaceful week. Make sure this weekend you go to church and take along your kids.
Our freedom of conscience and religion is being challenged by laws and regulations imposed by secular society. Faith on Trial, with Defender of the Faith, Deacon Mike Manno. Faith on Trial on Iowa Catholic Radio, iowacatholicradio.com, and the Iowa Catholic Radio app.
Support for Faith on Trial and Iowa Catholic Radio provided in part by Imogene Ingredients.